Afternoon, America. Brian James Blem here. I want to welcome you back to another episode of What the Fuck's Up. And what I want to talk about today, I want to sort of clarify and make a little bit more succinct, if I can, a couple of issues that were brought out in We the People USA Alliance's last podcast on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. If you got to watch it, thanks for tuning in. If not, you should check it out. We think we provide some excellent information. We had a very knowledgeable and proficient technical expert, Dr. Walter Doherty, on the show. And so check it out. If not, I'm going to sort of bullet point these and make them a little bit clearer. First, I want to talk about 2 points. I got 3 points in total, but I want to talk about 2 in particular first, because the third sort of flows from number 2 very, very succinctly. And so, first thing, Maricopa County, going into this election of 2022, knew that there would be a large Republican turnout because the call of the day, right? People were saying throughout Maricopa County, throughout the state of Arizona, throughout the United States of America, vote on election day, right? If you recall the Lake v. Hobbs trial, one of the county's attorneys came out and blamed Kari Lake for telling her voters to vote on election day, right? So Maricopa County knew that there was going to be a lot of Republican turnout on election day, that Republicans were focusing on that day primarily to get out and get their voters to the polls. So if you know a lot of Republicans are going to turn out, well, you think you would be expecting that and you would use the right tool for the job. Maricopa County did not. Right. Maricopa County used an 80-pound max weight printer with 100-pound ballot paper, right? Now, Maricopa County and Runbeck, I believe Runbeck supplies the printers to Maricopa County. They do supply the paper to Maricopa County, the 100-pound paper. They know all of the specifications. Maricopa County's technical people know all of the specifications of this equipment. And they recently did their study. They paid for their study that basically tries to throw Oki, the printer manufacturer, under the bus. Oki comes out and says, I'm sorry, you are wrong and we want a retraction because you knew that these were 80-pound max weight printers, right? So basically, they use the inadequate tool for the job. And sort of to analogize this, right? You all know printers, they have to have a heat buildup. Laserjet printers have to have a huge heat buildup to sort of fuse this ink to the paper so that you get really, really good black lines and black boxes and black ovals, and you can read everything and everything's clear, right? It takes a substantial amount of heat. Well, if you're using 100-pound paper, that requires more heat than this printer can really provide over a lengthy period of time, and you're going to get adhesion problems, you're going to get ballots that can't be read, and once you start getting ballots that can't be read, folks, you're going to start developing lines at the polls, right? That's one of the issues that happened, was this adhesion problem. And Maricopa County tried to hide all of the printer issues, including point number 2 we're going to talk about, in this number 1 category, right? They completely blew off number 2 because they don't want you to know how at risk your elections truly are. Right? And so this is a huge problem. Imagine you go out and you go buy a dryer, right? You get a clothes dryer because yours breaks and you want to dry clothes at your house. So you go out and they sell you this dryer. It's rated for 240 volts. So you take it home and you call your electrician and say, hey, I want you to install this dryer. And the guy comes over and he takes the 240 volt plug off of it and puts a 120 volt plug on it because you don't have 240 volt power there and he didn't want to wire the whole house. And so he plugs it into the 120 volt socket. Is your dryer going to dry your clothes? No. He might be able to get the dryer to tumble, but that's about it. The heater's not going to activate because it's not drawing enough power to do so. That's essentially what Maricopa County did going into the 2022 election. Second point, folks. The problem with printing of 19-inch ballots on 20-inch ballot paper. According to our expert, Printers don't just spit stuff out on their own. If you got a printer that's doing that, you might call a priest or something and perform an exorcism or something. But printers don't just turn themselves on and start spitting stuff out unless they're doing self-tests, right? And so, the problem with these printers every now and then randomly printing out a 19-inch ballot onto 20-inch ballot paper can only happen if there is pre-programming somewhere in the system with the printer telling it to do so. If there is malware or a virus on the system anywhere in here or loaded onto the printers that would cause them to have a mind of their own, or somebody has remote access into this system that can then send commands to printers and tell them essentially what to do and when to do it, or somebody from inside this system can send commands to make that happen, right? So you can narrow the window down of where to search. That never happened. Maricopa County has never looked for the cause of this issue, even though the director of the Maricopa County Elections Department, Scott Jarrett, testified under oath on day one of the Lake v. Hobbs trial that he'd never heard of this before. Nope, never heard of it. Come day two of Lake v. Hobbs trial and a lot of prep time, he says, oh yeah, this has happened before. It has happened in 3 previous elections, right? And he says, well, we got to do a root cause analysis. Maricopa County has never done a root cause analysis of what is happening here, folks. And that's why I have this diagram on the board. Essentially the way it works. MC tag, my Maricopa County's, tabulation and election center, is basically has a virtual private network. They go out and set up these vote centers in the community, right? And so you have all of these vote centers that then connect to the virtual private network. And then the vote centers have a couple of printers that are both connected. All of these are connected to what's called a poll book, and basically the poll book is access to your voter registration database, right? And you have data flowing through this VPN in both directions, right? Somebody comes in to vote and boom, it sends the data back into the virtual private network and back to MC-Tech. So MC-Tech can then shoot it out to the other vote centers to say, hey, this person has voted. And so that's, in a basic sort of general way, that's how this all works. Well, we have these 4 issues up here, folks. Something is happening in your system of elections, this very complex and convoluted system of elections that takes place in the cloud largely over what we would call the internet, although via a virtual private network, okay? This is problematic, folks, and what makes it even more problematic, as we talked to Dr. Doherty yesterday, the Center for Internet Security works very closely with the National Security Agency's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and an organization of the national security organizations that I talk a lot about on this show, because their goal was, to study and learn everything about elections. They've basically gotten involved in everything elections, and they farm a lot of their work out to a non-governmental organization known as the Center for Internet Security, right? So where can this be happening? Pre-programming, right? Pre-programming. There's some pre-programming somewhere in here so that the poll book is telling it to print, certain voters at a 19-inch ballot, an off-size ballot, right? Or you've got malware or virus on the printer or in the poll book that's telling it every now and then to print an off-size ballot. Or you have, as I said, remote access or local access, somebody busting into the system or somebody from within the system altering parameters, making changes, right? And so what's more likely? Nobody knows. Well, I, would focus, if I were an investigator, I would focus right here on the Center for Internet Security and what they call an Albert sensor. Because the Albert sensor that rides in the firewall is a computer system that has access to every piece of computer equipment on the totality of this network. right? That is one major point of vulnerability, right? Vulnerability. If you have people that don't like a certain candidate, don't like a certain party, don't like a certain issue, or want a certain outcome in an election, one person, folks, theoretically one person could determine the outcome of your election, or one person could stymie your election in this vote center by sending commands to printers that sort of muddy the waters, that create long lines on a day that a lot of people know that Republicans are going to be there. What happened with a 19-inch ballot image being printed on a 20-inch ballot, and why has Maricopa County never dug down into that issue? And my guess is it's because they don't want you to know that the totality of your elections and their outcome can be affected by people from outside of this system. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency routinely gets hacked prior to elections, folks, and they never seem to catch who the hackers are, and it's probably because it's rogue elements of the United States federal government. That's just my assessment at the current time. And so we need to fix this problem, because if one person can come into this system and basically shape the outcome, we don't have representative democracy. Our constitutional republic is over. We have nothing but what they tell us to do and what we can have. And with that, America, I'm going to say stay strong, stay tuned, and stay active, because 2026 is even more critical in terms of elections than 2024. And with that, I'm going to say peace.